So it's a perfect setup. We just talked about death.
Yes.
And now we get to talk about spirituality. And I think the two are very interconnected in terms of like what really matters. So we have about 20 minutes. I'd love to talk about both the Fetzer Institute and also why spirituality is such a focus and some of what you're learning from your study. So what if we start out with why spirituality? Why focus on this topic of all the different topics that could be a priority? Why choose spirituality as something that you say we need to support, research, better understand? So either of you want to start and address that?
I'll let Lynne start.
Well, I'll just say, with respect to the Fetzer Institute and the Fetzer Memorial Trust, which I'm privileged to be a trustee for, the man who created the Institute, John E. Fetzer, was a mystic, really, a really remarkable human being. I never met him. He died in 1991 before I got involved with the Fetzer Institute, but he had a very powerful and visible outer life. He owned the Detroit Tigers. He invented cable television. He was a big media guy in Michigan and worldwide, and he was very kind of out there as a big business, wealthy guy. And then he had this sort of mysterious and secret inner life. He had visions. He was experimenting with all kinds of really far out things. He was, people probably, if they'd known he was doing all that, would have said he was crazy. At the same time, he knew somehow that the most important part of his experience of life was the sacred inner life that he was deepening and growing and expanding, and eventually saw that that really was the crux of who he was and what he wanted to leave for the world. And when he died, he left a fortune. He didn't have children. His wife had already passed. So he left it in the name, the Fetzer Institute, to really deepen the world's experience and power and access to spirituality, also through science. So he's very interested in science. And so the Fetzer Institute, I've been there for 20 years, I think, I don't know how long, as a trustee, has been an incredible place to be a trustee, I just got to say, to be entrusted with the legacy of John Fetzer. Our mission is a 500-year mission, so it's not your average time frame. It's a 500-year mission. We're the first kind of, you might call, class of trustees. When we pass this baton to the next group of trustees, most of the trustees knew John Fetzer, I didn't. But we are looking now to set a course that will be an authentic foundation for the next 500 years, a huge responsibility. But it's deeply grounded in the understanding, the perception, the point of view that spirituality, the soil of spirituality, is where all of the work that really wants to be done on this planet needs to start. Needs to be connected with in order for us to have the world we really want.
Wow, that's a beautiful vision. Thank you. Thank you. And Gillian, can you say more about the particular focus on spirituality and why it seemed important to study and to actually research and to look at?
Just to build on to what Lynne said, I think that this integration, and I said it at the beginning of Wisdom 2.0, and why this is such a powerful experience of that. The integration of the inner life of spirit with the outer life of service and action has been kind of the guiding, well, it has been literally the guiding purpose for the Institute all these years, for the transformation of self and society. So I think that moving beyond the inner life for the transformation of self, which we all recognize here is extremely important, to the transformation of others and society. So our current mission, and it's evolved over the years, for those of you that know our work from the early years, very much focused on the integration of science and spirituality. Mind, body, spirit. How can we learn through science what's happening in our bodies? Then to the power of these incredible values of love and forgiveness, and how they then work to transform society, to now this evolution of our mission, which I think really encapsulates the original intention of John Fetzer to build a spiritual foundation for a loving world. So we literally set out to do this research of the study of spirituality in America because it's kind of our mission. So we needed to really understand, walk our talk, understand how the world understands this concept. If we're trying to transform society, we better understand how people are talking about it. And I would say this audience is one that's pretty adept at thinking about these things, thinking about the inner life, has the language for that. There are a lot of Americans who do as well, and there's many who this may be the first time they've talked about it. So we wanted to get a kind of a read on where Americans are with this evolving concept of spirituality. The word itself is still maybe a trigger for many, how they understand religion, the relationship between religiosity and spirituality. These were all ideas that we wanted to test and explore. And what we've discovered, so we're in this, it's about a 2-year research project. We've had a really robust qualitative stage, focus groups and in-depth interviews, and then used all that to inform a national survey that we just fielded, and 3,600 respondents, national representation of America, and it's been fascinating seeing these early findings. There's a real yearning for these conversations. And we experienced that here in the last few days. For some of you that may have participated in our kind of modified focus groups, we did hear what we did out in America. And even as adept as this audience is with the language, the leaning in, the need to talk about something that's really meaningful and informs who they are to themselves and to others, that yearning is really palpable out in the world. So I think that's something that we've gained so far from the research, and we're still in the very early days of kind of understanding the findings. One other really exciting finding for us, and I'll again make the point that we move beyond just understanding what spirituality may mean to an individual. We made the conscious decision that we wanted to see how did people connect that to who they are in the world, in their relationships, how they're civically engaged, politically engaged. Did they make that connection? So it wasn't just about what does spirituality mean to you, but do you make a connection with spirituality to who you are with others and your engagements? And so far, the early findings are really affirming that there is a correlation. We don't yet know, having parsed all the data yet, that there's that causation, that everybody understands that connection. But what we've seen is those who identify as more spiritual, more religious, that they have very pro-social behavior, high civic engagement, high community involvement. Wow. So we hope that bringing awareness to that, awareness, it always starts with awareness, right? Bringing some awareness to that will help people think more about how they are making those connections. Right now, there might be more separation. Who knows? We don't know yet. There's a lot more to find out.
And so you're also inclusive of people who might feel their spirituality is through a religious doorway, or people who also feel like their spiritual connection is not through a religious doorway.
Exactly.
And both are equal. How do you see both of those? Are they equally important, or is one a little different than others, or how do you view those?
Do you want to take that? It's very complicated.
Because one group tends to push the other way. It's like sometimes the faith-based people are like, we're the things, and then the other side can be just as demeaning to the faith-based people, say, well, I'm beyond that. I'm like, so not that. And so, and from what I understand, you're saying we all have a place at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that very much in keeping with Marianne Williamson's thoughts early this morning, that there's been a separation in society with spirituality, and that I think for many people there has been a separation that religion exists here and spirituality exists here. And many of the public narratives around spirituality and religion are you're spiritual but not religious, these wonderful SBNRs, and that's what the researchers call them. Right? The SBNRs. I'm sure there's a bunch in this room. They're all studied. But what we've found, and what we really intend to do too, is to insert more nuance into that narrative, that these have not been helpful to say that there's spirituality here and then there's religion here. We found in our research that there's incredibly spiritual people among the very faithful and religious, just as there are incredible spiritual people that didn't grow up with a religion or don't have a religion or needed to leave religion. We experienced it here in very powerful sharings just this morning of a woman sharing that, and she felt she needed to, in this group here, apologize for believing in God.
Wow.
Wow.
That's deep.
That was a hard moment to see, right?
Yeah.
And that somehow being faithful or being in a religion is not spiritually evolved.
Wow. Wow.
So I think there's a lot of lessons in that, and I'm just so proud of those who, and honor those who have shared when it doesn't feel safe or that they feel that they're an outlier. And I think there's a lot of promise in this research, and that what we've discovered, that the humanity of being spiritual, that spiritual is our birthright. This isn't a thing that someone else does, I think. And I hope that this research and what we do gives hope for all of us to live into that inner life. And again, back to the awareness. I mean, for me personally, I think the spiritual life is one where it's just an integration of who you are in your deepest self to your outer world. Yeah. And for many, that's heightened because there's a connection to something more. For me, it's a connection to all of humanity, that we're all interconnected. For others, it is that divine source. But there's room for all of that to exist. And I think with our democracy efforts, the Institute is one of our priorities is in democracy, that seeing ourselves and the other can start in this place of, wow, you also look up at the stars and feel awe and wonder. When I take a walk out and outside, I do too, or with my children, or when I gave birth, and seeing those spiritual experiences shared among each other, I think can help us.
Well, I know it's changing somewhat, but it used to not be very cool to say I am a spiritual person. You were seen as flaky, as not serious. You would rarely see a presidential candidate or a business leader identify as a spiritual person. And maybe it's just being in a capitalist culture that gets shunned and that gets pushed away. And what I see you guys both saying is like, no, that shouldn't be put in the closet. Like, that should actually be something that we're proud of, not in a competitive way, but in a way that's like, this is a part of life, right? We are physical beings, we're also spiritual beings. And I'm wondering, Lynne, what are some of your lessons? Because you've really shown up in the world holding that, holding both, we're here to change and make social change and important change, and we're also here to be connected to the spirit. And I feel like you and others have kind of like paved the path that many of us can now kind of walk through, but has that been a hard thing for you if you're looking at your life, to try and stand for both of those pieces?
Let me think. It hasn't been hard. It's been always present for me, but I didn't know how to name it, I'd say. I was very religious as a child. Not as a child, actually. After my father died, I got very religious because I thought it was my fault. And I was Catholic, and if you're Catholic out there, the whole guilt thing is really a whole number you run on yourself. And I started going to Mass every day. I was a popular kid. I was I was a cheerleader and homecoming queen and all the stuff that you're supposed to be. But then secretly I went to Mass every morning, and I didn't want my carpool to know, so I went at 5 a.m. And it was like a secret life. And I don't know what propelled me to do that really, but I now know, I thought it was religion, but I now would call it, I was craving spirit. I was craving a spiritual soil. I was craving something that had more meaning than what I saw was so vapid and meaningless. And I must say that the Hunger Project, where I spent many, 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 many years, I learned from people in intense situations of war and poverty and horrible oppression spirituality. I mean, I didn't expect to find it there. And I wouldn't have named it that then, but this experience of soul or depth or understanding that the human spirit can't be crushed no matter what you do to people. You know, it's moving to me. You can still find your soul, and particularly in harsh circumstances. So I've had the actual privilege of working with people in incredible situations of starvation and poverty and war and oppression, and that has been an environment where people's soul, people's substance, people's depth is where the only place they can go. And so to have access to that, to witness it, to see it, and to mirror back to them the holiness of the way they live. And I'm not saying religious now. I don't know what I'm saying. Taught me so much. I can't even begin to say it. And I'm so moved by the power of what it means to be human when you really deeply feel life. And so the Fetzer Institute, get back to our topic, you know, just being a trustee, I don't go there, I don't work there, but being someone who's responsible for financial resources, which we have a substantial amount of financial resources, and I wrote a book called The Soul of Money, really out of raising money mostly. That was where I got my big lessons. Now being on the other side of that,
life tends to do that, huh? They put us on both sides of things.
Having the opportunity to give away hundreds of millions of dollars over these years, not give it away, but partner with people and make their financial burdens lighten so that they can really be free to do what they want to do. I was able to name through the Fetzer Institute a lot of the things that I've been yearning to name that have drawn me into the kind of work I've done all my life. Even the shamanism, the work that we do with the Pachamama Alliance, to me is a deep spiritual yearning that comes from being human. And so Fetzer's been so powerful for many people who've been involved in Fetzer, or even the projects that we've been able to partner with, to give people words to name what I think everybody has. They don't necessarily always distinguish it. They often don't know how to name it. But this conference and everything you've done, I think, is that too. I mean, I'm so grateful to you, Soren, for what you've put together here. I mean, it's just, it gives us so much permission to talk about what's really matters to us, what's really going on. So I really appreciate it.
Well, I think as long as we resist, I love your word, the uninjured, the soul, the spirit. I mean, so many different names, right? We can point to it. God. There's so many different ways to describe that. But if we aren't able to own that, or to speak to that, or to hold that, and to honor that, it's hard for me to imagine creating any sustainable world from that. Because if it's just the material, and if it's just accomplishment, and it's just like success, that can be, there's nothing wrong with that. But without spirit, it's very shallow. And I think part of what gathers us here is this desire to live in a wise spiritual ground and be engaged in the world. Not to like go away to a mountaintop, but actually stay connected in the world. And that's what gives me hope. It's actually, these people give me hope that there's a community that we are all a part of that's like moving that forward. And sometimes it feels slow, and I wish we were going faster. And I'm like, why aren't we ahead? But I know that movement is the movement that I want to be a part of, that I want to be partnering. And I know when Fetzer and other places use the word love, and we're about forgiveness, we're about love, I'm like, thank goodness, like, let's be about that, right?
Yeah, and what an incredible thing to be involved with a corpus of money that's dedicated to empowering and financing love. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, it's so cool to do that.
And we need more of it.
More of it, because most, and this is really a Soul of Money message, but most money is going in service of fear. I mean, defense and bombs and overconsumption and destroying each other. And the world that we all want to live is we want to reallocate all that money and move it towards love.
Yes.
And
yes.
and that's one of the big jobs that Fetzer does so well.
Yeah, that's it. So we just have a few seconds left. That's a great ending. And I think when we think about energy, it's money, it's time, it's passions, right? Like how can that all be directed in the path of love? And I love that we can make an invitation out there to people, whether you have financial resources you can put to that, or whether you have time resources you can put to that, or whether you have contacts you can put to that, but that's the movement. Is there anything you want to end with in the last few minutes that feels left unsaid or needs to be said?
I just too, every year I feel so grateful to be a part of this community. It's so life-giving. It's so nourishing for me, and it's been a nourishment for times that have been really difficult for me. So I'm just grateful, and you all don't see this, but I'm looking down at these two monitors that are flashing the logo of Wisdom 2.0 and the theme, which maybe is for this year, but I think it's really the
power of connection.
Yeah, that's it. That is what I think all of our work is about, is this power of connection, because what we've been living in is a separated society.
Yeah.
And when we recognize that we're actually supposed to be whole, and we've said it at the Institute, so I'll end with this because I think it's so relevant, that our long-term goal really to create this loving world is to move from this ego-centered world that is driven by separation and fear, and is everything that we've been hearing is the problems of this conference, to a all-centered world that is grounded in wholeness and love. So that's what you're doing.
That's what we're doing.
And that's what all of you are doing when you
doing.
take this on and then bring it back into your community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.